If you're thinking about buying a car or maybe a boat, an airplane, or a piece of equipment, you're going to want to see this video. We are all very naturally skittish and skeptical when we're buying something like this and we're given the opportunity to kind of look around and do an inspection, right? And that's because dealerships and people have become experts at learning to hide blemishes and flaws. So we're allowed to inspect the vehicle, look it over, they do a detail on it, they shine the tires, they polish the engine, everything looks like a basically new vehicle, right? What I want to show you today is how to look somewhere where nobody wants you to look. It's kind of crazy to me, but there are car dealerships out there that actually offer cars with a warranty that is literally at the end of an oil change. I almost wonder if that's strategic, because interestingly, I wonder if problems start to show up the first time somebody changed the oil, and that is where we're going to look today. On something like this truck, the engine itself is more than 70% of the value of the truck. And if the engine were to fail or blow up, especially on a used truck in a higher mileage vehicle, you might as well throw the entire truck away because of the value of the engine. Of course, you could take your car, boat, airplane, piece of equipment, whatever it is, to a knowledgeable or reputable mechanic and put it through some sort of basic diagnostics or maybe some sort of pre-buy inspection, right? But I have personally never experienced in all the vehicles, equipment, airplanes, boats, things that I've owned, someone who has offered to take a close look at the oil. We're going to use a simple toolkit here to extract some oil from the engine. And then we're going to use a sampling system to try to determine whether there's any internal issues that might be hiding within the engine. It's sort of cliche, but the blood of an engine is the oil. And it actually touches so many of the working components of your engine that it can tell you a lot about what's going on the inside. Yes, it can tell you whether the pistons are failing, the valves are worn, there's some bearing failure, whether the coolant is doing its job or not, whether your fuel pump is doing a good job, whether the engine is running correctly or not. All of that can actually be determined just by taking a close microscopic look at the oil itself. So as much as you might want to look on the outside of the vehicle to see if there's any cosmetic blemishes, or maybe take a look at the interior to see if there's any issues with the carpet, the seats, the dash, the stereo, things like that, the best place to be looking is inside the engine. You can do this type of a test whether you're working with a car dealership or a private party, and of course whether you're buying an airplane, a piece of equipment, or something like that. This test is well worth the short period of time that it will take to complete, because the last thing you want to do is buy something that's going to blow up on you just outside the warranty period, or in the case of a private party, as soon as you drive it off the person's property. So what we have here is a basic syringe. So you don't have to have some toolkit ready to go when you're going to go buy a vehicle. If you find something you want, you can find these things at your local grocery store. This is just a little basting syringe. It normally would come with a small basting needle right here. Instead, it's just a syringe. It does a very basic job. What's important here is that it has a small connection or little nipple there to attach some vinyl hose. This is 1/8 inch vinyl hose. That's an important number. If you don't have this at the grocery store, you might be able to find it at a local hardware store, but somebody is going to have it locally. You don't have to order this off the internet. You don't have to wait. You can literally go buy these 3 things straight away and get to buying that vehicle so somebody else doesn't get ahead of you. So this is a pretty good length. I would probably buy around 5 feet just so you have enough, because some dipsticks can be quite long. This is actually a sample kit, and you can use anything that's clean and has a lid. If you have to, grab a plastic jar or maybe even a glass jar, something that you can put the oil in. Before we start this process, you're going to want to warm the engine up for at least 10 minutes. And you're going to want to stick around to the end of this video, because I've got an amazing tip for you to share that's going to take this to the next level. The first step is removing the dipstick for the oil. It's going to have probably a yellow cap on it, and it's going to look something like this. And this guy has a very long dipstick, which is why I recommend getting a long piece of that vinyl hose. Next, we can use this to make sure that we have enough of the vinyl hose to do this job, because the last thing we want to do is drop the vinyl hose down in the dipstick hole. So I've got my dipstick laid out here, and I've also got my vinyl tubing laid out just to make sure that my tubing is in fact longer than the dipstick. Of course, the dipstick is going to dip down and give you an oil level, so we want to make sure that it's a little bit longer than that. And then we're going to mark the vinyl tubing with where the dipstick would actually stop in the tube. So I just used a little piece of blue tape here. You could use a pen, a pencil, anything you can think of just to mark where this would normally stop. That will make sure that the end of our tube is actually sitting in the ideal part of the oil to get a sample. And I've got my small sample bottle ready to go. It's a small plastic bottle with a lid. And I'm ready to start threading the vinyl hose down into the dipstick. I felt a little catch on something down there, and so I just gave the tube a small twist and got past whatever it is. It's probably a junction in this pipe. A lot of times these are a two-piece pipe, and so there can be a small lip there, and the dipstick has a little angle built on it, and this one doesn't, so it can kind of catch. And I just want to make sure, that's why we mark this, because what we don't want to do is pull a sample too early. And you'll notice now, here we are right at the end of our blue tape. And here comes the oil. I'm having to cycle this syringe a couple of times because I've got so much tubing. Right before the oil comes, I'm going to cycle this. And here we've got oil coming into the syringe. And ideally, we want to fill that entire bottle. All right, we've got a nice syringe full. And now we have our sample bottle. And we're going to put our oil into the sample. Looks like I didn't get a very good draw on that one, so I'm going to have to do a couple of draws, and that should get me to where this sample bottle is full. If you're enjoying this video, please take a moment and share it with somebody who you think will benefit from it. It's amazing how something simple like this could save somebody you know, your family, your friends, or even a neighbor from making a bad buying decision. Got my sample bottle full. Just a couple of tips for you on this process. One, oil is thick, and so I had to be pretty patient with the syringe because this one's got some pretty weak seals on it, and so it took quite a bit of patience to let the oil draw up. I also think it's because of the length of that tube. This tube is considerably long, probably pushing 5 feet. So just be patient with this process. If it's not coming quickly, be sure to bleed the syringe and then try again. The second thing was, apparently because this tube is probably curling as it goes inside the oil pan down there, I had to feed the tube in just a little bit more because I was just pulling air. So if you feel like you're pulling air, be generous, just push that tube in a little bit further and you'll probably find that you get back into the oil. So the question is, what do you do with this sample? Well, there's no at-home testing that I'm aware of that can give you the amount of data that a laboratory can give you. So we're going to send this sample off to a laboratory, and they're going to put it through an analysis and then email back a report that we can read. It'll have a very detailed analysis full of kind of geeky data, and then the particular laboratory that I like to use also gives you a plain English way to understand what the oil is trying to tell you. So this sampling kit is actually from a laboratory called Blackstone Oil Analysis, or Blackstone Labs. I've been using them for quite a few years, and I'll show you kind of what's in their test kit. So if you contact Blackstone or just go to their website, you can request these sample kits, and you could even have one on hand, which I would highly recommend having if you're planning on doing some shopping for something with an engine, as we discussed earlier. They're super convenient. They have a small black bottle. This actually meets the Postal Service standards, so it's easily shipped. They used to include a label with these, but I've noticed that that has stopped. A small plastic baggie, that's of course to insert our sample, and then this small absorbent cloth. Now, you don't need all of this to do this process. In fact, if you go to their website, they have a process where you can literally use any container with a lid and just ship it to them, and they can do their magic. But normally, we would package this up in the absorbent cloth, put it in the plastic baggie, and then we have to fill out a small information sheet. And this is where the gold really happens. It would be one thing if you were getting oil data from just one engine at one point in time, but when you complete the make, model, miles, and oil type of your vehicle, what the laboratory can do is they can compare it to other samples they have in their database of similar vehicles, similar engines, with similar mileage. or different mileage. And this helps gives you a baseline. It's amazing what they can tell because they have such a large database of vehicles that they can tell you a lot about how your vehicle or engine compares to other vehicles. And that can be a really important thing because if you have a spike in one particular area, it can be an area of concern or caution. Or if your engine is outperforming, you might have found yourself a real stallion and a really good buy. Here in America, we send these samples in usually using priority mail, and there's two reasons for that. You're going to want tracking on your oil sample. You don't want it to get lost in the mail, especially if you're trying to make a purchase. You want things to be expedited. This is usually a 2-day shipping service for us in America, but they accept samples from anywhere in the world. So if you need this type of service and you're global, no problem. You can ship it to their lab and they'll give you the same information. If you were in a hurry, there's no reason you could not overnight an oil sample. It might cost you a little bit more, but if you're making a large purchase, this type of information can be extremely important, and they will expedite that sample for you and get it back to you. Is Blackstone the only one? No, there's actually quite a few different services like this that exist, at least in America, and I'm sure there's some all over the world. I have used several different ones, and my observation is that most of them provide very techie information that you would have to have kind of a degree to understand the science behind it all. This company I love because they provide a plain English analysis of the sample to tell you kind of what to expect or what the data is trying to tell you. So what's a practical example of what you're going to get back from the laboratory? We actually sent a sample in on this truck. And it turns out that part of the process in the laboratory is what's called a viscosity test. And what they're doing is measuring to make sure that the oil that you say is in the vehicle is actually what's in the vehicle. And it turns out the wrong oil was being used in this truck, in this particular engine. We live in a cold climate, and so we have a cold starting environment. Because the wrong oil was being used for this particular climate, this truck was showing excessive signs of wear. Now, it wasn't enough to justify throwing up any red flags. It was a simple change or fix for us. We simply changed the viscosity of the oil at the next oil change, and we're happy to report that those issues have since subsided. So hopefully you can use the oil analysis report that you get back to make a better buying decision. If you choose to move forward with something, at least you have full knowledge of what you're buying. It may even give you some negotiating power if there are red flags that get thrown up during the analysis process. Hopefully this test, this simple hack idea, will save you from buying a lemon, but more importantly will give you confidence in buying whatever your next engine is. All right, I've got one more tip for you to add to this process. So now that you know how an oil analysis works, this can actually be a powerful tool in two ways. One, maintaining your vehicle. So as you own the vehicle and you do oil changes, there's no reason not to grab a sample at that oil change and send it in. This will help you to identify mechanical problems before they even develop. Or something as simple as maybe you take it to a quick oil change place and whoops, they put the wrong oil in. That'd be a big problem. So doing this at oil changes can be a great way to just monitor the health of your vehicle, kind of like monitoring the health of your blood or maybe your well or something like that over the course of its life. The second most powerful piece of this is resale value. When you go to sell your vehicle, if you produce to the buyer a set of chronological oil tests, it can demonstrate to the buyer that A, you care about the vehicle, and B, the condition of the vehicle is prime. And therefore, you should be able to collect top dollar if you decide to sell whatever it is that you bought.